Now coming to stem cell research, we have a lot of stem cell research going on, even this very institution stem cell research is going on. So we need to have a committee called as the institutional stem cell committees, to which you make a presentation and they approve it. And then depending upon whether the stem cell is going to be used on animals, tested on animals or tested on human beings, then it gets subsequently approved by the Human Ethical Committee or the Animal Ethics Committee. But in these also, if the stem cell which is going to be used is a human embryonic stem cells, and then we need to have a national committee has to give the approval. When it comes to animal studies, if you are going to use primates or large animals like beagle dogs, then there's again a national committee which has to give approval, which means the institutional committees have their own limitations. Up to a certain level they can give approval, but beyond that both the stem cell committee as well as the biosafety committees all have to go to a national committee for further approval. So it is better to have a full knowledge of this, because occasionally what happens, someone gives an information saying that this happened here, that in the agriculture university, someone was working with a genetically modified fish was being studied and no approval was given. Then the government hauled them up saying that when you do any kind of genetic modification, even whether it's in plants or in animals, you have to get it approved by the Institutional Biosafety Committee and a national committee called the Review Committee for GM. And we also have a committee at the Ministry of Environment. You know, you should realize that many of our research is also monitored by the Environment Ministry. Some of us don't even know. Ministry of Environment and Forests also looks at these ministries, and therefore we need to take approvals from them as well. This is about a definition of under the Code of Federal Regulations in the United States. Everything including what is research, what is a human subject, etc. clearly defined. Now this is something which is a good thing to know, is that today the boundaries between medical research and clinical practice are becoming increasingly hard to trace. Someone may say that they are just treating their patients, but when you document their data of the clinic of the patient and then subsequently make a presentation or publication, you should have taken the patient's consent for utilizing the particular data. So medicine is at its center a moral enterprise grounded in a covenant of trust. And this covenant obliges physicians to use their competence in the patient's best interest, which is the fundamental of ethics. Because I mentioned about the role of commercialization, which is influencing research. Now we have a variety of review processes. In the West, they have some research which is exempt. Some of them are expedited reviews and some require the entire board reviews. But those which have been exempt are, we do routine surveys or we take an interview or do some educational tests, etc. And research using data, documents, records and pathological specimens, etc. from the archives do not require or could be exempt from research. But in our country now the present law is that even if you are going to use a retrospective data, you have to put across the proposal to your Institutional Ethics Committee, and the Institutional Ethics Committee then tells no further requirement is needed, there is no question of informed consent form, then you can go ahead. But if there is any issue, for example, you are dealing with subjects of any vulnerable subjects, or there is an issue of confidentiality, when a patient comes to your hospital and his data is held in confidence in the hospital, when the hospital allows that to be utilized for any purpose, you have to make sure that the patient's identity is always kept undisclosed. So then we have these, because expedited reviews are there in the West, where sometimes just a few members of the committee could quickly give an approval, but that does not take place in our country. Every review given by the Institutional Review Board has to be done in person. You cannot get your approvals done in circulation. This is happening in the past. So what happens is you urgently want an approval. The next meeting of the ethics committee is going to be 1 month away. You are in a hurry to do it. The industry guy is pushing you. So what you do is you send it through a courier to everybody or email it to everybody and independently take their opinion and say that's not permissible anymore. You have to call for a meeting and all the quorum has to be there and all the members should be physically present. The data should be present, the proposal should be presented to the committee, and only then the approval is considered as valid. Of course, the ethics committee, the members of the ethics committee are the people who have to have the highest both credibility as well as knowledge, and their primary role is to protect the interests of the subjects. We find that very often in our ethics committee, many of us who are professional members are too worried about the scientific content of the entire study. So we spend a lot of time looking at study designs, etc., etc. Well, all the while, we don't look at the informed consent form. So it is essential that the ethics committee should realize that scientific review generally takes place well before it comes to the ethics committee, but it is fine that there are scientific issues, you could raise it, but the most important is you look at the informed consent form. And in the informed consent form, making sure that the information provided correctly. And there are also issues like what do you do when the patient has any injury. And we find that often in our country, the industry has got a role in preparing the informed consent form, and they make sure that words like compensation, words like taking care of the injury which arises out of the study are sort of camouflaged. They don't clearly state that in case you develop any problem which is directly related to the clinical trial, the sponsor will take care of your entire treatment. They don't say that. They'll say an insurance will be provided and your physician will take care of it. And the hospital, in the interest of the hospital, the investigator and the patient, that they should be quite aware of the sponsor's ability to modify informed consent form. Make sure that you state very clearly to the patient that in case there's any injury arising out of this, the entire treatment will be taken care of by this, paid for by the sponsor. It's also in the interest of the hospital. Otherwise, what happens? The patient doesn't go to the sponsor. In fact, the patient doesn't see the sponsor. This patient sees the investigator. This patient knows the hospital. He straight away comes to the hospital in emergency, and the hospital doesn't know whom to charge.